The Pacific stretches wider than imagination allows. From above, it looks serene, a sheet of blue glass breathing in slow rhythm. But below, its silence has weight. Every inch downward feels older, denser, as if time itself thickens with the pressure. Down there, light loses its name. It bends, fractures, then fades until the world becomes a moving darkness. This is where sound travels farther than sight, where a single echo can linger like a memory refusing to let go. Submariners knew this silence better than any sailor who ever stood beneath the open sky. To them, the ocean was not an enemy, but a patient listener. Their engines hummed like heartbeats inside a living cathedral. The steel walls surrounding them separated life from pressure. Thin, trembling, eternal. Sometimes they said the water pressed close enough to listen. Other times that it whispered back. Beneath those miles of depth, the sea keeps what it takes. Wreckage, voices, entire stories, all held in suspension, unburied yet unreachable. It is said that nothing disappears there, not completely. Every sunken vessel becomes a new syllable in the ocean's endless language, one that no human voice can speak. And somewhere among those syllables, they believed was a light, faint, deliberate, and impossibly blue, flickering in the dark like the sea's own recollection of the living. Those who saw it called it many things. Those who didn't still felt its pull, somewhere beyond sound. Inside a submarine, silence is not the absence of sound. It's a kind of music. Every vibration hums through the steel like a pulse. Every valve hiss carries its own rhythm. The crew moves with that rhythm unconsciously, speaking softly, their voices muffled by layers of metal and pressure. Red lights bathe the corridors in a perpetual dusk, keeping eyes adjusted to the dark. The air tastes recycled, warm with breath and oil. Outside, the ocean presses in on every surface, steady and immense, like a hand that never stops testing the walls. In that world, sound becomes sacred. A dropped wrench can echo like a shout. The sonar ping, sharp, brief, mathematical, cuts through the water and returns as a ghost of itself, answering from distances that no one can truly measure. Every man listens for the difference between the expected and the wrong. It's a language of machines and instincts, of hums and heartbeats. Sometimes the wrong sounds came, an extra echo that didn't belong, a metallic tap that moved when no one did. The men would pause, glancing toward the bulkhead, trying to decide if it was the sea or their imagination. The commander would tell them to log it, nothing more. But the tension would linger in the air long after. They said that after long months underwater, you start to feel the submarine breathing with you, one heartbeat shared between man and machine. And when that heartbeat changed, when it faltered or stuttered, you knew something else was listening. The ocean is vast, but it remembers patterns. It recognizes when something new begins to stir in its depths, and when something unnatural answers back. The last patrol began like any other. The crew aboard the Ardent followed procedure with quiet precision. Coffee poured, bearings checked, log entries written in the calm, deliberate handwriting of habit. Outside, the Pacific stretched featureless, a dark field of unseen motion. Inside, everything was measured. Air temperature, battery charge, oxygen flow. Routine was survival. It kept fear from forming edges. At 180 meters, they switched to silent running. Only the soft hum of the turbines remained, faint and rhythmic. The sonar operator leaned close to his screen, watching lines scroll like slow tides. He noted a shimmer on the radar. Interference, maybe plankton, maybe nothing. The commander nodded and logged it as such. But later, the crew noticed something else. Through the small forward viewport, a faint illumination drifted past. Not the green of plankton, nor the pale white of surface light refracted. This was different, blue, deep, deliberate, as if it moved with thought. It flickered once, twice, then lingered, pulsing gently in the water beyond the glass. No one spoke for several seconds. The helmsman whispered that it looked alive. The commander ordered lights dimmed, instruments steady. He recorded the observation in the patrol log. Unidentified marine luminescence, duration 12 seconds. That was the final entry. The transmission sent shortly after contained no distress, no alarm. Just the routine check, depth, heading, silence. Days later, when the Ardent failed to surface, no trace was found, no debris, no oil slick, no sound. Only the last note in the log, and the word blue underlined twice, In naval archives, it was filed under missing, presumed lost. But among the men who'd served in her shadow, it became something else. The first whisper of what they would come to call the light. It was nearly 20 years before they found her. The Ardent lay tilted on her side, half buried in a plain of silt nearly a kilometre down. The Pacific had preserved her in strange grace, hull intact, conning tower fractured but still recognisable, like a cathedral steeple fallen in slow motion. When the remotely operated submersible descended into the darkness, its floodlights cut narrow paths through the suspended particles. Every movement stirred a glittering snowfall of rust and memory. The voice of the operator, transmitted from the research vessel above, was calm but edged with awe. Visual contact, depth confirmed. The screens flickered, shapes resolving out of shadow. Torpedo tubes, the faint curve of the bow, the number 473 barely visible beneath marine growth. For a moment, the light swept across a porthole, and something inside reflected back. Divers followed days later. Their suits creaked with pressure as they descended, their breathing loud and intimate inside the helmets. The world around them was silent, colourless, until they reached the wreck. There, faint and pulsing in the water, was a soft blue glow emanating from a point near the ruptured hull. It wasn't steady, but rhythmic, almost patient, as though it had been waiting. They circled it slowly, cameras capturing the phenomenon from every angle. One diver reached out, his glove brushing the edge of the shimmer. It flickered and vanished, leaving only darkness. It moved, he said quietly, though no one had seen motion. When the footage was reviewed, the light was visible for precisely 41 seconds before it disappeared. The official report listed it as bioluminescent anomaly. But in the unspoken spaces of the ship's mess, the crew began calling it something else, the breath of the sea. A month after the wreck's discovery, technicians analysing the Ardent's final recordings found something unusual buried in the static. The last transmission, labelled 41B, was routine at first. Coordinates, depth confirmation, weather. Then, beneath the hum of equipment, came a faint pulsing tone. It was too regular to be interference, too precise to be mechanical failure. When visualised on a spectrogram, the pattern formed a rhythm, rising, falling, rising again, like the trace of a heartbeat. Audio engineers replayed it at lower frequencies. The tone expanded into something almost melodic, a sequence of pulses repeating in groups of 3, followed by a pause, then 2 more. One analyst described it as a code without a sender. Another, less formally, said it reminded him of light flickering underwater. The phrase stuck. When they synchronized the timing of the signal to the footage from the recovery dive, a strange correspondence appeared. The pulses matched the intervals of the blue glow recorded near the hull. Perfect synchronization, separated by 20 years of silence. It made no logical sense. The original recording predated the wreck's rediscovery. Still, the alignment was undeniable. Command requested further review, but the tape was old, fragile, decaying from salt exposure. The sound deteriorated more with every playback, as if erasing itself. Before it failed entirely, an operator noted a brief whisper of modulation. Not words, but a texture. Almost like breathing, he said. The report's final notation read simply, origin unknown, possibly environmental resonance. Off the record, a junior officer made a different note in his own journal. If the sea wanted to remember something, maybe this is how it would sound. Long before the Ardent was found, the light had already entered rumour. Divers, fishermen, and sailors along the Pacific Rim told quiet stories of a blue shimmer seen in deep water after submarine losses. Some said it drifted upward like smoke, others that it pulsed within the waves, a dim radiance that appeared just long enough to make men doubt what they'd seen. No one ever reported it officially. It was considered bad luck to name such things. Among the declassified fragments of Japanese naval records, a single note survives. A lieutenant from the submarine I-367 wrote of a gentle light beneath the keel following us for several minutes, like a lantern carried by the sea. The entry was dated 2 days before the vessel disappeared. His handwriting is steady, unafraid, as though describing weather. The ocean took both the ship and the man who wrote it. American archives hold similar accounts. Sonar operators who claim to see illumination spreading below them, slow and deliberate. One survivor, rescued from a downed patrol plane, swore the light rose from the depths moments before the sea swallowed the wreckage. He said it was beautiful, like something watching, not warning. Scientists dismissed such reports as afterimages, stress hallucinations, or chemical reactions from ruptured fuel lines. But those who had seen it never spoke lightly again. They described not fear, but recognition, the feeling that something vast had noticed them, and then moved on. In every version, the light came after silence and left nothing behind. It was not a beacon or a threat, only a presence. To those who served beneath those waters, it became a superstition too delicate for words, a final acknowledgement between the living and the deep. When the Cold War reshaped the oceans into corridors of surveillance, strange data began surfacing in naval archives. Sonar anomalies, unexplained frequencies, faint luminescent reports logged by deep-sea monitoring stations. Most were filed, analyzed, and quietly dismissed, but a few bore a red stamp, Category Delta, Marine Photoluminescence Unexplained. These were not meant for public eyes. In one report dated 1954, a research submersible from the US Navy's Pacific Division documented sustained blue radiance near a submarine graveyard north of the Marianas Trench. The report's tone is clinical: coordinates, light intensity, duration, water clarity. But the final page is blacked out. A handwritten note in the margin survives: same wavelength as 41B pattern. No follow-up file exists. By the late 1960s, the phenomenon had quietly earned a nickname among certain naval analysts: the lantern effect. It appeared sporadically, often after seismic activity or weapon tests, sometimes near known wrecks. Whenever samples were taken, the light dissolved before containment. One memo proposed organic luminescence triggered by residual current from metallic decay. Another simply read, "not biotic." Decades later, when these documents were finally declassified, entire paragraphs were missing. The absence said more than the words that remained. Historians noted that each sighting coincided with the anniversary of a known sinking, almost to the day. To the public, the ocean was mystery enough. To those who had listened to it for decades, it was something deliberate. They began to wonder whether the sea itself observed in patterns, whether what it kept wasn't just matter, but memory. Some files close with a single line, typed in a faint, uneven ribbon. Phenomenon persists. Observation continues, and then nothing, only silence, stamped and archived, like the ocean filing away its own unfinished thoughts. Long before instruments and archives, the people of the Pacific already spoke of lights beneath the sea. In small fishing villages scattered across Micronesia, elders told of blue fires that drifted through the shallows after storms. They said it was not lightning or reflection, but the sea remembering those it had taken. When the ocean burned blue, the nets came back empty and no one fished until dawn. It was considered a time of listening, not of hunger. On islands farther west, the story changed form but not meaning. Divers whispered of spirit lanterns, lights that appeared after ships vanished in typhoons. Children were told to bow their heads when the glow passed under their boats. It was a gesture of respect, not fear, a recognition that the sea had gathered another story. When Western surveyors recorded these tales in the early 20th century, they dismissed them as myths born from phosphorus and algae. But the descriptions remained eerily consistent. A soft human blue, pulsing in slow intervals like breathing. Some islanders claimed the light guided lost sailors to shore. Others believed it marked the graves that had no land to rest on. A historian from Guam once wrote, "Every culture near the ocean invents a reason for its silence. The blue light is ours." His paper was archived, unread, until the rediscovery of the Ardent decades later, when divers described the same glow using nearly the same words. Across generations, the meaning never truly changed. The light was not menace, but memory. The ocean's gentle acknowledgement of the living and the lost. In every retelling, the same truth lingered beneath the surface. Some things sink, others stay, and a few, for reasons no one understands, continue to shine. It was a data analyst named Meredith Shaw who first noticed the pattern. She had been digitizing declassified naval coordinates, wreck sites, seismic readings, deep-sea bioluminescence records, when the overlays began to converge. Each recorded instance of the blue light appeared within a narrow corridor of the Pacific, forming a loose spiral stretching from the Coral Sea up toward the Aleutians. At first, she dismissed it as coincidence, but as more files surfaced, the spiral became undeniable, precise in its geometry, like something drawn slowly over decades. The correlation deepened when she compared the locations to the anniversaries of lost vessels. The light appeared not just near the wrecks, but often on the same dates the ships had vanished. Even time, it seemed, obeyed the pattern. Her report, methodical, unsensational, concluded that the phenomenon demonstrates consistent spatial and temporal clustering beyond probability. She suggested magnetic anomalies, oceanic currents, or bioelectric cycles. Her supervisor added a single note in the margin: correlation does not imply intention. But those who reviewed the data felt otherwise. When the pattern was shown to surviving submariners, many grew quiet. One traced the spiral's curve with his finger and whispered, "It's following us home." The shape was eerily similar to sonar maps of whale migration: circular, purposeful, unhurried. The study was never published. The Navy folded the research into a broader environmental program and buried the files under routine headings. But among the analysts, a quiet phrase lingered: the ocean marks its memories. For Meredith, it became less about science and more about understanding presence, the way light could behave like thought, and the way disappearance, if repeated often enough, begins to leave its own geometry behind. When the reports of the blue light reached the scientific community, marine biologists were quick to seek reason within the mystery. They began with what they understood best: life. In laboratories overlooking harbours and research bays, samples of bioluminescent plankton were collected and subjected to pressure tests. Under controlled conditions, some species did glow in deeper hues when exposed to sudden shifts in current or vibration, but none could reproduce the exact wavelength captured in the recordings from the ardent site. One oceanographer proposed a hybrid reaction: metals from decaying submarines leaching trace elements into the water, reacting with microbial enzymes. Another theory suggested piezoelectric flashes, light born from stress, the ocean itself briefly sparking under pressure. The explanations were elegant, even poetic, but incomplete. Every test ended the same way: the light appeared, then vanished without pattern, leaving instruments running in empty darkness. Still, the scientists persisted. They wanted it to be natural, measurable, something that could fit inside a lab report. Yet privately, several admitted the phenomenon carried an uncanny rhythm. "It behaves," one researcher said, "as though it's aware of being watched." Funding waned. The studies were reduced to footnotes in environmental reports, labelled unresolved luminescent anomalies. But among the field notes, a quiet sentiment repeated: the ocean reacts to loss. For those who had once worn uniforms instead of lab coats, that phrase meant more than data. The light, whether chemical or conscious, seemed to appear only where human presence had ended, as if the sea registered the moment of absence. Science could name its components, but not its intent. And so, the reports concluded, further observation required. Yet, none returned. The sea had made its statement, wordless, precise, and profoundly indifferent. In the years following the discoveries, a few of the men who had once served beneath those waters began to speak, not in interviews or official debriefings, but in letters and late-night confessions. They wrote about dreams, not nightmares exactly, but memories reshaped by sleep. In those dreams, the ocean was endless and still, and far below, a faint blue light shimmered like a heartbeat in the dark. It didn't chase or threaten, it simply waited, pulsing softly, until the dreamer felt himself sinking toward it, calm and unafraid. One submariner described standing inside a corridor with no walls, feeling the same pressure he had known underwater, but gentler, almost protective. The light, he said, wasn't outside the hull this time. It was inside me. Another recalled hearing the hum of the engines long after retirement, the sound blending with the rhythm of his pulse until he could no longer tell which was which. Psychologists might call it survivor's echo, the mind reinterpreting trauma through imagery. But the men disagreed. To them, the dreams felt less like memory and more like invitation, as if the sea had extended something beyond explanation, beyond fear. They described waking with a strange peace, a sense that something vast had forgiven them. One note, written by an aging sonar officer, captured the feeling best. When I close my eyes, I still hear it. The pulse, the hum, the breathing water. It's beautiful now. Not a warning, not a sound of danger. Just recognition. No medical report could explain such dreams. Yet among those who had lived beneath the surface, they became common. A quiet understanding that the ocean remembers its own, and sometimes it remembers kindly. When the recordings of the Ardent's final transmission were revisited decades later, new technology allowed for deeper analysis. Sound engineers stripped away interference, amplifying only the lowest frequencies. The tones that human ears rarely notice, but the body somehow feels. What emerged was not a message, but a rhythm. Every 32 seconds, a faint rise in amplitude appeared, pulsing steadily through hours of static. It was so regular that one analyst overlaid it with a digital heartbeat. The match was nearly perfect. At first it was dismissed as coincidence, a byproduct of machinery or crew respiration. But there were no voices, no mechanical cycles to explain the continuity. Even as the transmission decayed, the pulse remained consistent, soft, patient, and alive in the data. When the same filter was applied to recordings from other wreck sites, fragments of the same rhythm surfaced again, like threads of a single pattern woven through decades of silence. Some believed it to be resonance, the sea itself vibrating at the frequency of memory. Others said it was merely physics. Yet those who had served below felt something more personal. One retired captain, after listening to the cleaned audio, simply nodded and said, "That's what it feels like when the ocean listens back." In the end, the pattern offered no answers, only affirmation that silence, when deep enough, begins to echo. And in that echo, something human remains, steady and unbroken, waiting to be heard. In the late spring of 2022, a private oceanographic team returned to the coordinates where the Ardent had been found. Technology had changed, the submersibles sleeker, the sensors more precise. But the ocean remained unchanged, vast and indifferent. The descent took nearly 3 hours. The deeper they went, the more the world dissolved into darkness, until only the hum of the thrusters and the soft exhale of oxygen filled the capsule. Outside, nothing moved. The cameras showed only drifting snow, flakes of sediment suspended like memory, weightless and endless. At the wreck site, the floodlights illuminated the submarine once again. The hull was quieter now, more consumed by coral and time. Instruments recorded stable readings, no unusual signals. Then, without warning, the light changed. A faint azure glow began to shimmer near the bow, faint at first, then pulsing in slow rhythm. It wasn't bright enough to pierce the dark, but enough to feel alive, as if it existed somewhere between electricity and breath. The crew said nothing. They simply watched, each pulse reflecting in their helmets. One scientist whispered that it looked like the wreck was dreaming. The light lingered for 40 seconds, maybe less, before fading back into blackness. The sonar fell silent again, the water heavy and still. When they surfaced, the lead diver described it carefully. It flickered once, like a breath, and then the sea exhaled. The report listed the event as transient luminescence, unexplained, but in the ship's unofficial log, someone added a final note in pencil. It waited for us to return. Among the artifacts recovered from the Ardent years earlier were a handful of letters, sealed in a rusted storage tin, the ink blurred but still legible in places. Most were never sent. They were ordinary words, written by men who believed they would return. One wrote about his daughter learning to walk, another about the way the ocean smelled different before rain. They spoke of weather, rations, and birthdays missed, small fragments of a world still waiting above them. When historians read those letters aloud for transcription, the tone shifted from curiosity to reverence. Each sentence carried the weight of someone's last ordinary moment. In one, a young radio officer wrote, "The sea looks kind today. I think that's how it forgives us." Another ended mid-thought, the ink pooling where the pen must have hesitated as the vessel began its descent. The letters were later displayed in a maritime museum, resting behind glass under soft blue light. Visitors lingered longer than expected, drawn not to the technical data but to the handwriting, the small loops, the uneven lines, the humanity pressed into paper. For many, it was the first time they felt the story as something lived, not lost. In the glow of those letters, The myth of the blue light shifted meaning. It was no longer seen as omen or anomaly, but remembrance, the ocean's echo of the words that never reached their shores. A curator once said quietly to a colleague after closing time, "Maybe the sea remembers so we don't have to." The phrase stayed with her, written later on the exhibit's final plaque. No one changed it. At night, the Pacific appears endless, a dark mirror swallowing sky. Waves move like slow breathing, their crests catching fragments of moonlight before sinking back into shadow. From the deck of any ship, the horizon feels less like a line and more like a thought, stretching outward without end. It was here, under a sky washed pale with stars, that the story of the blue light reached its quiet conclusion. The research team anchored above the wreck one final time. They turned off their instruments, cut the engines, and drifted in stillness. Beneath them, nearly a kilometer down, the ocean held its secrets, untouched. For hours, there was nothing. No movement, no signal, only the calm pulse of the waves against the hull. Then, without warning, the water below the ship began to glow. Not bright, not violent, just a faint blue shimmer, so soft it could have been imagined. It pulsed twice, then faded, leaving the surface unbroken. No one spoke. They didn't need to. Every person on deck understood that some mysteries are not meant to be solved, only witnessed. When dawn came, the sea was still, smooth, reflective, indifferent. The last entry in the expedition log reads, "Observed faint luminescence. No measurable data. Event duration, 31 seconds. But in the captain's private journal, a different note was written. Some lights are not warnings. They're farewells. The transmission ended there. The ocean reclaimed its silence. Above it, the sun rose over a horizon that seemed to stretch farther than before, carrying a single lingering thought. Even in the deepest dark, remembrance finds a way to shine.